Good Shabbos, good Erev Shabbos. It's Erev Shabbos Parshas Bahaloscha. I am reminded of a story, an anecdote, of a woman walking out of her palatial home in Beverly Hills. Walks to the street corner and sees a pauper begging on the streets and says to the woman, "Lady, can you spare a buck? I haven't eaten in 3 days." She looks over at him and she says, "Wow, I wish I had that kind of willpower." Two people looking at the very same experience, the very same event, very, very differently. It's a challenge that we have living in a society where everybody's looking at the same events, but seeing them very, very differently. The Jewish people in the Midbar did not have the challenge of hunger because, in fact, they were well fed. But they did have the challenge of a bad menu from their perspective. Didn't have enough diversity. The Jewish people complained to Moshe Rabbeinu about not having meat. And Moshe Rabbeinu, in and of itself, is rather perplexing. But Moshe Rabbeinu's response is even more perplexing. Because Moshe says, quite famously, Hargeni Naharog. He looks at the Jewish people and he says to Hashem, this is what I have. This is the Jewish people. This is the leadership that I'm called upon, the type of people that I'm called upon to lead. Hargeni Naharog, kill me now. I'm done. What makes Moshe Rabbeinu's response so perplexing is to contrast it with how Moshe Rabbeinu addressed the failure of the Jewish people a little bit earlier at the Chet HaEgel. There, the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu pleaded for the forgiveness of the Jewish people. The Medrash commenting says that Moshe Rabbeinu took God by the shirt collar, as it were, and held on to him and said, "I will not let you go until you forgive the Jewish people." This is like night and day, 180 degrees difference. In Kivros Hatava, when the Jews were complaining about meat, Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Kill me now. I have nothing to say for these people. I don't want to have anything to do with them." When it comes to the Chet HaEgel, one of the 3 big sins that a Jew is supposed to give up their life for, Avodah Zarah, Moshe Rabbeinu turns to the Rabbonu Shalom and says, "Forgive the people. I want you to forgive them." Why was Moshe Rabbeinu willing to go to bat for the Jews after the Egel? But when they complained for a little bit of meat, he unloaded on them and he unloaded on the Rabbonu Shalom. It seems like it's almost 2 different people, like 2 different personalities. And I think that the answer is staring us quite clearly in the face. It's not Moshe Rabbeinu who is different, but it is the nature of Klal Yisrael as reflected in their indiscretion, which is different. When the Jewish people looked to the Egel, the Jewish people indeed were wrong, and the Jewish people were mistaken, and the Jewish people were brazen, and the Jewish people should not have gone down the path of worshiping the golden calf. However, at least they were trying to fulfill some spiritual yearning, to fill the hole, the void, the spiritual void that was within them. Moshe Rabbeinu looks at these people and he says, they are so off the derech, as we might say in modern parlance. But these are people worth fighting for. These are people that are worth saving. These are people that could have a future. Because in their essence, there is a spiritual yearning and a spiritual core that just needs to be tended to so it can flower properly and meet its mission. Fast forward to the Kivros Hatava, the people complaining about meat, and Moshe Rabbeinu looks at them and says, "This is it? The people are complaining about a menu? This is not worth my time. This is a people that is not even worth fighting for, a people worth saving. Hargeni Naharog," Moshe says, "kill me now." Because what is clear about Kivros Hatava, the complaining of the meat, the Medrash says, they weren't even so much complaining about meat. Meat was a metaphor. It was a nice way that the Torah implies and hints to us what was really going on. And that is the people were complaining about the limitations on being able to meet their sexual desires. Now, with the giving of the Torah and the laws that have been foisted on the people through Matan Torah, their sexual appetites could not be met the way they were before. And this is what they were complaining about. So whether it's meat from the pshat of the psukim, or Chazal telling us that meat is simply a metaphor for a much deeper type of desire and lust and want and impulse and appetite. It's all about feeding me, feeding my belly. And that's not what Judaism is about. That's not what a spiritual Torah life is about. A spiritual life is about looking sideways to our neighbors and looking upwards to the Ribono Shel Olam. And here's the extraordinary paradox. When we live a life dedicated to serving our neighbors and serving the Ribono Shel Olam, quite paradoxically, our material, physical needs and desires and lusts seem to be more content. It's a paradox, but it's true. And we all know it from our life experience. We all enjoy the pleasures and delights of life, as we well should. But a life which is focused on material desires can never be fully fulfilled. A life which is focused on a spiritual yearning can find a sense of contentment and wholeness. Moshe Rabbeinu looks at the people and he says, "This is it, Hargeni Naharog." I recently read a book about the life story of Rabbi Yossi Wallace, a very fascinating fellow with a fascinating life story. And he recounts in his book about his own family's history several hundred years ago. One of the last people to be killed by the Spanish Inquisition, burned at the stake, was his great-great-grandfather. What kind of person allows himself to be burned at the stake? And not just any type of punishment. He was burned at the stake. Can't imagine something worse than that, except for how he was burned at the stake. According to the archival records in Madrid, there was a 1,000-page file of the Inquisition, which still exists today, on Rabbi Wallace's great-grandfather's case and trial. And in that 1,000-page file, it records that when they led his great-grandfather to the stake to be burned, they set up the pyres of fire somewhat of a distance. So that way, the heat as it grew and the fire as it grew would get hotter and hotter, and the person who was going to be burned alive would have an opportunity to recant and to affirm their Christian faith and to recant their Jewish faith. The file records that as the fires were raging and getting closer and closer and the heat was burning, Rabbi Wallace's great-grandfather raised his hand and told the priest to come forward. He was ready to recant. His sister, Catalina, was tied to a neighboring pillar. Upon seeing him raise his hand, she screamed out with her final bit of strength, "Don't give in. They're only able to burn our clothing. They will never be able to touch our souls." What kind of person allows themselves to be burned at the stake? Say a few words. Say, "I recant." And indeed, Rabbi Wallace's grandfather, at the behest of his own sister, put down his hand, told the priest to walk away. He was going to be burned at the stake alive. What kind of person does that? Not a person, kivros hatava, not a person whose main desire in life is about the meat, but somebody who has a spiritual core and an essence, who is trying to meet that spiritual journey. Moshe Rabbeinu was willing to go to bat for the Jews at the Egel, because the Jews at the Egel demonstrated a personality of spiritual growth. Moshe Rabbeinu was incapable and uninterested in going to bat for Klal Yisrael when they complained about the meat, because that's not Judaism. Judaism is not about feeding me. Judaism is about looking outwards and upwards, and through looking outwards and upwards, ultimately becoming whole and complete within. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us the strength and the wisdom during these very tumultuous times, to be able to lead a life of spiritual rectitude and refinement. And may that spiritual rectitude and refinement ripple through our community and our country as a whole. Good Shabbos.